just you and I.
All right, so we're going to be talking about infrastructure as a service in this lesson. Infrastructure as a service is really the cloud service model that provides the customer the greatest amount of flexibility, but also the most responsibility over security. In this lesson, we're really going to cover all the components of infrastructure as a service and really understand the right use cases for it. Because of the service models, there are specific uses for infrastructure as a service, and it may not be necessary for all businesses or customers who want to move to the cloud. And then when using infrastructure as a service, we're going to talk about the responsibilities of the customer versus those of the cloud provider. The customer really gains the advantage of being able to install any operating system they want when using infrastructure as a service. They're installing that operating system on top of the hardware that's provided by the hosting provider. Everything you see here on the left is really the responsibility of the hosting provider. The hosting provider is taking over responsibility of maintaining their data center. That includes all the physical elements of security, making sure that no one can get in or out of the data center, making sure that the utilities are backed up in a redundant fashion to ensure that power and connectivity are always established with that data center to ensure availability. And then the hosting provider is also maintaining all the hardware. That means patching, upgrading, configuring the hardware. And then on top of the hardware is really the abstraction and core connectivity and delivery layer. This is where the hosting provider ensures that the hardware-based services environments can be abstracted and turned into virtual environments that the cloud customer is able to access. And the customer is accessing those through APIs, application programming interfaces. And those APIs are also maintained by the hosting provider in this model. The infrastructure as a service model also provides customers with a very fairly cost-effective means of business continuity. And if you had an on-premise solution, you might need to rent a cold site, a physical area near your on-premise solution for business continuity and redundancy. The infrastructure as a service is more akin to a warm site. It really has the utilities, the hardware set up, and the customer it's not like they can immediately fail over, but they could use a backup to restore their production environments fairly quickly. So one of the drawbacks of infrastructure as a service is that, the hosting provider, they are maintaining all that hardware, but you don't really get much of an insight as the customer into how well that hardware is maintained, what underlying hardware your operating system is running on. However, you still get the flexibility to implement any kind of operating system you want. Now, the customer is responsible for maintaining those operating systems and patching any kind of software and upgrading it that rests on top. As I said before, the major benefit is really in terms of business continuity and flexibility of the operating system that can be installed on top of the hardware and infrastructure as a service. Okay, now let's reflect on a few things. What are the reasons a company might choose infrastructure as a service? We talked about a number of them in that the company is developing or building an application on top of an operating system that isn't typical or may be unique, or they have a specific business case where they really can't just use something that's out of the box. They really have to develop that the environments themselves. What are the dividing lines and responsibility of infrastructure as a service? As I said, the provider is really responsible for maintaining the physical security of the data center, the utilities, the hardware that the customers utilize, as well as maintaining those APIs that customers access to utilize the cloud services in their virtual environments. The customer is responsible for maintaining the operating system that they deploy in infrastructure as a service and any data that goes into that operating system. What are the advantages and disadvantages? Well, the main advantage is that you have fairly low-cost business continuity services, increased flexibility in terms of what operating system you want to deploy in infrastructure as a service. The disadvantage is you really lose control over the actual hardware that the service is running on. However, you really gain the benefit that someone else is maintaining that and absorbing the costs of maintaining the physical data center and the physical security as well as the utilities. All those costs are sort of baked into the services you pay for when using infrastructure as a service. All right. In summary, we talked about those core components covered by infrastructure as a service, we talked about the benefits and limitations, and then also the responsibilities between the customer and the provider when using infrastructure as a service. See you in the next lesson.